My family went on a $3,000 getaway without inviting me, then expected me to look after their children for free. When I left at 5 a.m., they called CPS upon discovering I wasn't there. I'm Riley, 22, a recent college graduate with a degree in finance. Ever since I was young, my goal was clear: finish high school, attend a good university, land a solid job, and move out on my own. It sounded straightforward, didn't it? But life had other ideas. I completed my degree and returned to my parents' house in a small Ohio town. Don't misunderstand me. I love my parents, Denise and Russell. They're kind-hearted people who've worked tirelessly to provide a stable home for me and my sister, Morgan. But moving back wasn't the future I'd envisioned during my 4 years at college. The plan was to stay temporarily, just a few months, while I searched for a job and saved for my own place. It seemed like a practical choice, even if it bruised my ego slightly. No rent, free meals, and a chance to regroup while planning my next steps. I told myself it was a smart move. At first, things went smoothly. Within a week, I landed a job as an analyst at Western Group, a medium-sized firm focused on financial planning for small businesses. The salary wasn't impressive, but it was steady, with decent benefits. That evening, I came home, grabbed a plate of food, and shared the news at the dinner table. "I got the job," I said, thrilled. "I start Monday." I expected excitement. Maybe a, "We're so proud of you." Instead, my parents exchanged a glance, the kind that signals bad news is coming. My stomach sank. Mom set down her fork, offering a strained smile. "That's wonderful, Riley, really. We knew you'd find something fast." But Dad jumped in. "We've been meaning to discuss something with you." My heart sank further. This wasn't going to be good. Mom sighed, clasping her hands. "With my arthritis worsening, I've had to reduce my hours at the library." "And the auto shop's been cutting my hours too," Dad added. "There's talk of more layoffs." I knew where this was headed. "We could use some help with expenses," Mom said, her tone apologetic. "Just until things stabilize. You wouldn't need to pay rent, just help with utilities and groceries." I stared at my plate. I'd planned to contribute a little to cover my own costs, but this was more than I'd expected. Still, they were my parents. They'd always supported me, and it didn't seem like a huge ask. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. "It's the least I can do." Looking back, that's when I should have set boundaries. But guilt is a powerful force. Over the next 6 months, a routine took shape. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, and collapse. Each month, I handed over a chunk of my paycheck to cover bills, groceries, and other expenses. I also took on small tasks my parents said they didn't have time for: running errands for Mom when her arthritis acted up, or fixing Dad's Excel spreadsheet since he wasn't tech-savvy. It wasn't just money. It was my time, energy, and patience. At first, I told myself it was temporary, a small way to thank my parents for always being there. But as time passed, I noticed subtle shifts. If I mentioned saving for my own place, Mom would sigh and say, "It must be nice to dream about moving out while the rest of us are just trying to survive." Dad wasn't much better. He'd mutter, "Some folks don't realize how tough it is to make ends meet," whenever I spent money on myself, like buying new work clothes. It wasn't just guilt. It was a lack of recognition for what I was giving up. My friends stopped asking me to hang out because I couldn't afford it. My dream of moving to the city faded as my savings stagnated. When I told Mom I was considering a second job to save faster, she only said, "Just don't let it interfere with what we need." That hurt. What we need. I was pouring everything into keeping the household afloat, but it was never enough. I didn't think it was malicious. They weren't cruel or demanding. But the guilt trips were constant, like water wearing down a stone. Meanwhile, I felt trapped. I'd planned to stay for 3 to 6 months, but the more I helped, the more they relied on me. The bills kept coming, and I kept paying, while my dream of independence slipped further away. I still looked at city apartments, imagining my own space. But before I could act, life threw another curveball. It was a Friday evening in late spring. I'd just gotten home from work, looking forward to a quiet night with leftovers and Netflix. Mom was in the kitchen, and Dad was outside messing with the lawnmower. Everything seemed normal until the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my older sister Morgan looking frazzled. Her husband, Travis, stood behind her holding a bag. Their kids, Ava, 5, and Milo, 3, were running around the yard like tiny whirlwinds. "Surprise!" Morgan said with a forced grin. Travis looked exhausted, lugging suitcases. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping aside as Morgan breezed past me like she owned the place. "We need a place to crash for a bit," she said, flopping onto the couch with a dramatic sigh. "Travis's consulting gig ended, and my boutique's sales are down. Rent's been tough to cover. You get it." Except I didn't. I had no idea they'd let things get so bad, they'd show up unannounced with their whole family. Travis shuffled in, arms full. "Hey, Riley," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact before hauling stuff upstairs. I stood there, stunned, as Mom came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "My babies!" she exclaimed, pulling Morgan into a hug. "You poor things. You've been through so much. Don't worry. We'll take care of everything." Dad walked in a moment later, holding Milo like a sack of potatoes. "This one nearly gave me a heart attack," he said, chuckling. "Ran straight for the mower like it's a carnival ride." Morgan gave a weak laugh but didn't bother correcting Milo or apologizing. I stood there, watching the scene unfold like I was in another dimension. Within minutes, my parents were fawning over Morgan like she'd just returned from a war zone. Mom was already planning dinner and where to put the kids' beds, and Dad offered to clear his tools from the spare room for more space. Meanwhile, I was invisible. That night, in my room, I tried to focus on a work spreadsheet, but the chaos downstairs was deafening. Ava and Milo raced up and down the hall, shrieking. Morgan's voice boomed as she vented to Mom about her business woes. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was just a few weeks. I could handle that. The next morning, it was clear Morgan and Travis weren't leaving anytime soon. They unpacked their bags, filled the spare room's closet, and took over a pantry shelf for the kids' snacks. And without saying it outright, I was appointed the babysitter. It started small. Morgan would casually ask me to watch Ava and Milo for a bit, while she and Travis ran to the store. "Just an hour," she'd say, grabbing her purse. But that hour often stretched to 2 or 3. Weekends were the worst. I'd wake up hoping for a quiet Saturday to read or catch up on shows, only to find Morgan and Travis dressed to go out. "We're meeting friends for brunch," Morgan would announce, handing me a list of kid activities she'd found online. "We won't be long." By not long, she meant most of the day. The first time I pushed back, Morgan acted like I'd suggested abandoning the kids in the woods. "Riley, it's just brunch. You don't even have plans. What's the big deal?" "I was going to catch up on work," I said, pointing to my laptop. Morgan rolled her eyes. "You're just on your computer anyway. Can't you do that with the kids around? You're being so dramatic." Then Mom chimed in. "Riley, honey," she said, her voice dripping with faux wisdom. "Morgan works so hard. She deserves a break sometimes." "I work hard too," I said, but Mom brushed me off. "Of course you do. But you're single, sweetie. You don't know the pressure of raising a family." It was like my struggles didn't matter because I didn't have a spouse or kids. No matter what I said, I was made to feel selfish for wanting boundaries. If I asked for space, I was making it about me. When Morgan and Travis returned from their endless brunches or errands, they'd act like they'd just run a marathon. "You don't know how tough it is out there," Travis once said, collapsing onto the couch like he'd been digging ditches instead of sipping coffee. I wanted to scream. I didn't know how tough it was. I'd just spent 6 hours keeping Milo from eating crayons while Ava demanded snacks every 5 minutes, but pointing that out would be whining. So I spent my Saturdays watching cartoons, stopping Milo from throwing toys, and cleaning up Ava's messes. Mom and Dad conveniently disappeared during these babysitting sessions, claiming they had errands or garage work. When I mentioned it to Morgan, she rolled her eyes. "Riley, they're just kids. It's not that hard." Not hard. Easy for her to say when she wasn't wiping marker off the walls or explaining why eating glue is a bad idea. The worst part? No one seemed to appreciate what I was doing. Morgan acted like I was overreacting if I brought it up. Travis barely spoke to me unless he needed something. And Mom and Dad acted like this was just how things were. "You're such a help," Mom said one night after I mentioned how exhausted I was. "It's good practice for when you have kids someday." The guilt trips were wearing me down. Every time I considered saying no or setting firmer boundaries, I heard Mom's voice. Family helps family. But what about me? Didn't I deserve my own life? It wasn't just babysitting. My paycheck, which had barely covered 3 people, was now stretched thin with 5 more. Groceries and utilities doubled overnight. I tried bringing it up after dinner one night. "Hey, Morgan, could you and Travis chip in for groceries this week?" She looked at me like I'd asked her to. Sell her car. "We're barely getting by, Riley. You know that." Travis nodded. "It's rough out there right now." I bit my tongue, but I was furious. As weeks turned into months, I felt like a prisoner in my own home. My bedroom was my only sanctuary, but even that wasn't safe. Ava and Milo would barge in, leaving toys and crumbs everywhere. Everyone but me seemed to think this wasn't temporary. Morgan and Travis were getting too comfortable, and I was paying the price, financially and emotionally. I should have spoken up sooner, but every time I tried, I was made to feel like the villain. I was told I was overreacting or selfish, so I stayed quiet. Then one night, I overheard something that changed everything. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but in a house full of loud voices, it's impossible not to hear things. I was in my room, scrolling through job listings to escape the chaos downstairs, when I caught the tail end of Mom's phone call. Yeah, we're all heading to Florida next weekend for Celeste's retirement party. It'll be great to have the whole family together to celebrate. I froze. Florida? Retirement party? Whole family? I stepped into the hallway, straining to hear more. Mom was still on the phone, pacing in the kitchen. Of course, Riley will stay to watch the kids. It makes sense. No need to drag them to something they wouldn't enjoy. There it was. The whole family was going to Florida, except me. Apparently, I'd already volunteered to babysit. I went back to my room, my mind racing. How could they exclude me like this? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I wasn't told about the trip, wasn't asked if I could babysit, wasn't given any heads up. They just assumed, because that's what my family did. The next few days were a mix of anger and tense silence. Morgan was busy buying vacation outfits, showing off her new swimsuit and sandals around the house, while Ava and Milo tore through the living room. Travis kept talking about how much he needed a beach break. Mom was in full planning mode, making travel arrangements and checking her packing list. Dad, as usual, nodded along, offering little beyond the occasional grunt. No one mentioned that I wasn't going. I tried raising it gently at dinner one night. So, when were you going to tell me about Florida? I asked, poking at my salad. Mom looked surprised. Oh, I thought Morgan told you. Morgan didn't even look up from her plate. I figured you knew. Mom's been talking about it for weeks. Weeks. And no one thought to tell me. So the plan is you all go to Florida and I stay here with the kids, I asked, trying to stay calm. Well, yeah, Mom said matter-of-factly. It makes the most sense. The kids wouldn't enjoy a retirement party and someone needs to stay with them. You're great with Ava and Milo, and it's not like you'd want to go anyway. That last part stung. Why wouldn't I want to go? I asked, keeping my tone even. Morgan finally looked up, her expression a mix of pity and annoyance. It's a family trip, Riley. Adults only. You wouldn't even know anyone there except Aunt Celeste. And you're not exactly close to her. Dad jumped in, trying to smooth things over. We just thought this was the best setup for everyone. You'll have the house to yourself, nice and quiet. Quiet? Did he think chasing two hyper kids all weekend while they sipped cocktails on the beach was relaxing? I dropped the conversation after that. They'd already decided, and nothing I said would change it. As the days passed, I felt like an outsider in my own family. The excitement in the house was palpable, Morgan and Mom constantly chatting about outfits, plans, and restaurants they'd visit in Florida. Travis, usually emotionless, seemed genuinely thrilled. Meanwhile, I was invisible, but this wasn't new. Growing up, Morgan was always the star. She was the cheerleader, her achievements celebrated with fanfare. I was the quiet, studious one. Her trophies lined the shelves, her photos dominated the walls. Years later, nothing had changed. Morgan was still the golden child, and I was the afterthought, the one they called when they needed something, but never truly valued. I tried to focus on work, but it was hard with Ava and Milo constantly bursting into my room or fighting over toys. Morgan's parenting style seemed to involve handing the kids a tablet and letting them run wild. Travis wasn't much better, glued to his phone while chaos unfolded. But one afternoon, I overheard Morgan talking to Mom in the kitchen. "It's so great having Riley here," she said. "I don't know what we'd do without her watching the kids. She's like the glue holding us together. That's what I was to them. Not a person with my own dreams, but the glue for their lives. That's when I knew I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness for a family that took me for granted. I spent the rest of the week planning my escape. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. I thought about where to go. Then I remembered my college friend Brooke had mentioned a camping trip that weekend. She and some friends were heading to Blue Ridge Falls and had invited me along. I'd declined, assuming I'd be stuck babysitting. But now it felt like the perfect opportunity. I texted Brooke that night. "Is there still space on the camping trip?" Her reply came instantly. "Of course. We're leaving early Saturday. You in?" I stared at my phone for a moment before typing, "I'm in." It felt liberating. I was finally putting myself first. This wasn't just a camping trip, it was a lifeline, a chance to escape the chaos consuming my life. But pulling it off would be tricky. My family had a knack for noticing anything that didn't revolve around them. If they found out I was planning something for myself, they'd guilt me into staying. I had to be careful. The days leading up to Saturday were tense. Morgan was in full vacation mode, strutting around with new beach hats and blasting her playlist. Travis spent his time fussing with the kids' car seats and grumbling about luggage. Mom ran around with a clipboard checking her packing list. "Riley, don't forget Ava likes her milk warmed at bedtime," she said, as if I hadn't heard it a dozen times. "And Milo's fussy about his pajamas. Make sure he's in the blue ones." I nodded, holding back the urge to snap. There was no point arguing. I'd already been assigned weekend babysitter, and nothing would change their minds. By Friday night, the house was a circus. Mom and Morgan were debating snacks for the trip. Travis was fixing a squeaky suitcase wheel while the kids ran wild in the living room. Dad, as usual, had retreated to the garage to check on tools, his escape from the madness. I watched from the kitchen, sipping tea and counting the hours until morning. Around 10 p.m., things quieted down. Mom put the kids to bed, Morgan went upstairs to pack her final items, and Travis sprawled on the couch, scrolling his phone. I waited until the house was silent, then slipped into my room and grabbed my duffel bag. I'd been packing discreetly all week to avoid suspicion, stashing my hiking boots and clothes in the back of my closet. I quietly added my toothbrush, flashlight, and some snacks, then zipped it up. My heart raced, not with fear, but with excitement. This wasn't just about camping, it was about taking back control. My alarm went off at 5 a.m. I grabbed my bag, tiptoed to the front door, and winced as it creaked louder than I'd hoped. I froze, expecting someone to call out, but the house stayed silent. The cool morning air hit me as I stepped outside. I glanced back at the dark house, got in my car, and drove off. As I pulled out of the driveway, I felt free. The drive to Blue Ridge Falls was calm and refreshing. The further I got from home, the lighter I felt. I turned on the radio and relaxed for the first time in months. Though I kept wondering how my family would react when they woke up, I pushed the thoughts aside and focused on myself. Brooke had sent me the campsite details, and when I arrived, the sun was up. She was already there, unloading her car and setting up her tent. "You made it!" she called, waving as I parked. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, grinning. The campsite was secluded enough to feel like an escape, but close enough for easy hiking trails. Brooke introduced me to the group, college friends and co-workers, all friendly and low-key. We spent the morning setting up tents, gathering firewood, and planning hikes. By noon, we were deep in the woods. Being surrounded by trees instead of screaming kids felt surreal. Brooke and I fell into an easy conversation about work and life. She didn't ask about my family, and I didn't bring them up. This trip wasn't about them. It was about me. That night, we sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. "This is exactly what I needed," I said, sinking into my camp chair, warmed by the fire. "Same," Brooke replied, tossing another log on. "We should do this more often. Just escape everything, you know?" I nodded, staring at the flames. For the first time in ages, I felt at peace. No one was asking me for favors or guilting me. I was just me. I didn't check my phone all night. When we got back to the campsite after hiking, I was exhausted in the best way. My legs ached, my face was sunburned, and my heart felt lighter than it had in months. I wasn't thinking about my family's demands. I was thinking about what I wanted, where I was headed, and how I'd get there. Then I walked through the front door. The house was a disaster. Toy cars, markers, and an empty cereal box scattered across the couch. A faint burnt smell hung in the air, and I heard voices from the living room. "Riley's back," Mom said, her tone sharp, not warm like usual. I dropped my duffel bag and walked in. Mom, Morgan, Travis, and Dad sat there, faces red with anger. Ava was screaming, and Milo was on the floor, clutching a juice box. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "What's going on?" Morgan snapped, standing and pointing at me. "You vanished without telling anyone. That's what's going on." "I told you I wasn't watching the kids this weekend," I said, crossing my arms. "You didn't say where you were going or what you were doing," Mom shouted, her face flushed. "I'm an adult. I don't need to report my every move," I replied, my patience thinning. "When we saw you weren't here with the kids, we panicked," Travis said. "Panicked didn't even cover it. They said they were stunned when they woke up Saturday and found me gone. No car, no note, nothing. Instead of assuming I'd taken a break, they jumped to the worst conclusion." "We thought something happened to you," Mom said, her voice shaking. "We called CPS. That stopped me cold." "CPS? For what?" "For abandoning the kids," Morgan cried, like it was obvious. "First off," I said, raising a hand, "I never agreed to watch your kids. You decided that without asking me. Second, calling CPS because I wasn't here is ridiculous. What did you tell them? We left our kids with someone who didn't agree to it, and now she's not home, so arrest her? It wasn't ridiculous when we didn't know where you were," Mom snapped. I couldn't handle their nonsense anymore. "So what happened when CPS showed up?" "They left after we explained," Morgan muttered. "But do you know how embarrassing that was?" "Embarrassing?" I said, my voice rising. "You called CPS because I didn't babysit your kids and you're worried about embarrassment?" The argument spiraled from there. Morgan called me selfish and reckless. Travis said I'd let everyone down. Mom kept saying I'd abandoned the family. Dad just sat there, shaking his head in disappointment as usual. By the time the shouting stopped, I was too exhausted to keep going. I grabbed my bag, went to my room, and shut the door. The chaos continued through Monday. I left for work early, avoiding more guilt trips or accusations. My phone was flooded with texts. Mom, we need to talk about your behavior. Morgan, Riley, you totally screwed us over. Travis, you owe us an apology. I ignored them all. At work, I tried to focus, but the weekend's stress lingered. My coworkers noticed something was off, but I wasn't about to spill my family drama in the break room. When I got home that evening, Mom was waiting in the kitchen. We need to talk, she said, arms crossed. I'm tired, I replied, trying to slip past. Riley, she said firmly, blocking my path. This can't wait. I sighed, set my bag down, and braced myself. Your sister's hurt, she said, her voice stern but softer. She feels like you let her down when she needed you most. I stared at her, incredulous. She needed me to babysit while she went on vacation? That's not my job, Mom. You're part of this family, she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. You should do your share. Funny how that only applies to me, I shot back. When has Morgan ever helped me? When has anyone? Mom opened her mouth but said nothing. Exactly, I said, grabbing my bag and heading upstairs. The next few days were icy. Morgan barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was snide remarks about how hard it is to find reliable babysitters. I was done letting their guilt trips control me.